Ethan Miller had nothing left, no home, no family, just a newborn daughter he struggled to keep alive on the freezing streets of Los Angeles. But everything changed the night he picked up a wealthy CEO's lost wallet stuffed with cash he desperately needed. Instead of keeping it, he walked miles to return it. He had no idea that choice would unravel a past tragedy and begin a story that would save all three of them. Ethan Miller had gotten used to disappearing in crowds not because he wanted to, but because the world had slowly trained him to fade into the background. A year ago, he still had an apartment, a job fixing vac systems, and even a few friends he sometimes met for cheap beer after work. Now no one stopped to acknowledge him as he sat on the cold pavement of Sunset Boulevard with his 5-month-old daughter bundled against his chest. Every passing second reminded him that his life had narrowed to two goals: keep Lily warm and keep Lily alive. The nights in Los Angeles were not supposed to feel this cold, yet to someone sleeping on the sidewalk, even a mild breeze could slice like a blade. Ethan shifted Lily closer, trying to shield her from the air that seeped through the threadbare blanket he found weeks ago behind a laundromat. Her tiny hands curled into fists against his shirt, searching for warmth. Every time she whimpered, something inside him cracked a little more. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be a man begging strangers for spare change so he could feed his child. But life rarely followed the rules he once believed in. Lily didn't know how the world had failed him. She didn't know about the medical bills that buried him after her mother died during childbirth, or the job he lost when he couldn't return to work soon enough. She didn't know about the landlord who gave him exactly 5 days to vacate the apartment because he fell behind on rent. She didn't know any of it, and she never would if Ethan could help it. All she understood was hunger and cold, and the warmth of her father's heartbeat when he held her close. When cars stopped at the red light near his spot in front of a high-end sushi restaurant, Ethan lifted his voice in the gentlest tone he could manage. "Anything helps, sir. I'm just trying to get formula for my little girl." Some drivers rolled up their windows. Others stared straight ahead, pretending he was invisible. A few dropped coins into his cup without looking at him. Lily's soft cries blended with the distant honking and chatter from the outdoor patio where wealthy customers enjoyed $100 plates of sushi, sipping sake without a care in the world. Ethan didn't envy their wealth, he envied their peace. He envied the luxury of sitting somewhere safe, of knowing where they would sleep that night. Around 9 p.m. a man exited the restaurant wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Ethan had made in the last 3 months combined. The man's steps were confident, controlled, the kind that came from someone used to being obeyed. His hair was silver at the temples, his watch clearly expensive, and his expression suggested he didn't tolerate anything that threatened his perfectly ordered life. This was Jonathan Reed, though Ethan didn't know it yet. To Ethan, he was just another passing stranger who would ignore him. And he was right. Jonathan walked past, without slowing down, giving him a glance that felt more like dismissal than acknowledgement. Ethan had seen looks like that often enough to know when someone believed he had chosen homelessness, as if it were a hobby rather than a slow, relentless collapse. Lily began to fuss again, her small body shivering. Ethan rocked her gently, whispering, "It's okay, baby girl. Daddy's here." He tried not to let frustration rise. Anger would not fill Lily's stomach, and it would not get them off the street. Instead, he focused on breathing, on keeping his voice steady, on staying alert. Being homeless with a baby was like standing on a tightrope in a storm. Every second demanded balance, caution, and a bravery he sometimes wasn't sure he possessed. As he adjusted Lily's blanket, a man nearby opened the door to the parking valet stand, and Ethan's attention drifted toward a sleek black Tesla backing out of a reserved spot. That was when he saw it, a dark brown wallet lying half hidden in the shadows near the curb, right where the Tesla had been parked moments earlier. At first he thought it belonged to someone else, maybe a passerby. But when the valet hurried off to assist another guest and the Tesla turned the corner, Ethan realized it had to belong to the suited man who had just left. He hesitated, his heart hammered in his chest as he stared at the wallet. It looked expensive, heavy, and inside, who knew, cash, credit cards, receipts, anything could be in there. Anything. Ethan hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. Lily needed formula. They were running out of diapers. Every survival instinct screamed at him to grab the wallet, take whatever he needed, and disappear before anyone noticed. He knew how easy it would be. No one was looking at him. No one ever did. But something inside him pulled in the opposite direction, something stubborn, something moral, something that refused to let him cross a line he couldn't come back from. Lily shifted against his chest, letting out a weak cry, and Ethan swallowed hard. He couldn't teach his daughter about right and wrong in the future if he broke every rule now. Even if nobody else cared, he cared. Even if the world had been cruel to him, he would not let it shape him into someone he wasn't. He knelt down, scooped up the wallet, and tucked it inside his jacket next to Lily's tiny body. He didn't open it. He couldn't, not yet. Not until he found a safe place to sit and catch his breath. He moved to the side of the sidewalk, sat against the wall of the building, and only then pulled the wallet out. His hands trembled not from excitement, but from the weight of the decision he knew he had to make. Inside the wallet was more money than Ethan had seen in months' bills, neatly stacked $500 in cash. More than enough to change everything. Enough for food, shelter, clothing, even a motel room for a few nights, enough to breathe. Enough to hope, but also enough to ruin him if he made the wrong choice. He found a driver's license at Jonathan Reed, the same man who had walked past him minutes earlier. A CO, a millionaire. A man whose life didn't seem to have room for people like Ethan. Beneath the license, stuck in a small pocket, was a photograph that made Ethan pause. Jonathan looked younger 10 years, maybe with an 8-year-old girl sitting on his lap, her curls bouncing around her face. Both of them smiling like the world was perfect. A father-daughter, like Ethan and Lily, except Jonathan had the luxury of wealth, stability, security, and Ethan had a blanket, a sidewalk, and a baby depending on him. He stared at the picture longer than he meant to. Something deep and raw twisted in his chest. She must have been his whole world, he murmured. He shut the wallet slowly, the decision already taking shape within him. He would return it, all of it. Because doing the right thing was the only thing he still had control over. And because Lily deserved a father she could look up to, even if she never understood how hard it was to be that man. He pressed his lips to the top of her head and said softly, "We're gonna give this back, okay? Even if he never knows what it cost us." Ethan had no idea that this small act of honesty on a night when everything felt hopeless was about to collide with a past tragedy Jonathan had spent years burying. And neither man knew that the wallet in Ethan's hands would become the beginning of a story that would reshape all three of their lives forever. Jonathan Reed didn't think twice about the homeless man sitting near the valet stand that night. To him, Ethan was just another part of the city's background noise, one of thousands scattered across Los Angeles, whose presence he had learned to step around like cracks in the sidewalk. It wasn't cruelty, at least not the deliberate kind. It was the type of indifference that grows naturally in powerful men who spend too long surrounded by polished conference tables, private drivers, and people who never say no. Jonathan's world moved fast, efficient, predictable. Homelessness didn't fit into any of his schedules, budgets, or mental compartments. As far as he was concerned, someone like Ethan existed on a different planet entirely. Leaving the restaurant, Jonathan typed a quick message to his assistant, instructing her to confirm the next morning's board meeting. He didn't notice the way Ethan had lifted his head as he walked past, nor did he hear the soft plea for help. The valet rushed to open the car door for him, and Jonathan gave him a distracted nod before sinking into the leather seat of his Tesla. His mind was already somewhere else, thinking about quarterly numbers, a development proposal in San Diego, and a flight to New York he was debating canceling. He had no idea that at the moment the car rolled out of the parking spot, his wallet had slipped from his coat and landed on the pavement. Inside the car, Jonathan felt a familiar emptiness creep into his chest, the kind that settled there almost every night after work. Success had become routine, accomplishment felt dull. Even lavish dinners, like the one he had just enjoyed, failed to spark the joy they once did years ago, when Emily was still alive. He would have done anything to come home to her laughter again. Instead, he now entered a mansion that echoed with silence. He disliked thinking about it, so he didn't. He simply pushed the thought away the same way he pushed away everything that threatened to remind him of what he had lost. As the car pulled into traffic, Jonathan's gaze drifted to the sidewalk where Ethan sat. He saw a man huddled over something small, wrapped in a blanket. but his brain didn't bother processing that it was a baby. People like Jonathan rarely saw details unless those details affected their world. In his mind, Sunset Boulevard was full of people who had made bad choices. People who had let life swallow them because they were too weak or too reckless to swim. Jonathan prided himself on being the opposite: disciplined, focused, controlled. He believed, deep down, that discipline separated winners from losers. That belief made it easier for him to turn away from suffering. When the valet closed his car door, Jonathan barely heard Ethan's voice asking for help. He barely acknowledged him with a glance. In that fleeting moment, Jonathan didn't see a father desperate to feed his newborn. He saw what he expected to see another night, another homeless man. Nothing more. And because of that, he dismissed him without a second thought. The Tesla glided down Sunset, its electric engine humming quietly. Jonathan loosened his tie and leaned back. His expensive suit felt tighter than it had earlier that day, the collar too stiff, the cuffs too stiff, everything too perfect in a way that somehow suffocated him. He reached for his wallet out of habit, intending to tip the valet through the app. His hand tapped the empty pocket of his coat. He frowned, checked the other pocket, then his pants, then the center console. The wallet was gone. For an ordinary man, losing a wallet was an inconvenience. For Jonathan, it was a potential disaster. Inside was not only cash and cards, but his driver's license, business IDs, and even a boarding pass for a flight next week. Worst of all, a photograph of Emily he carried everywhere. Not replacing the cards, he could do that in an hour. Not the money, he spent that amount without thinking. But the photograph that was irreplaceable. Jonathan pulled the car over. "Did I drop it when I came out?" he muttered. The valet hadn't said anything. Had someone taken it? Had it slid under the seat? He combed through the car, irritation building with every passing second. Not because of the loss itself, but because losing anything contradicted the image he maintained: a man in total control. For a moment he considered returning to the restaurant, but something held him back. He had already left. He had no intention of going back in front of the crowd of diners. It embarrassed him to imagine himself retracing steps like a man who made mistakes. Jonathan preferred to think of himself as efficient, as someone who didn't waste effort on things he couldn't reverse. First thing tomorrow, he told himself, I'll cancel the cards. He took a deep breath, calmed himself down, and drove off toward Beverly Hills. He never wondered who might have picked it up. He never imagined a homeless father cradling the wallet, debating what to do with $8,500 in cash. Jonathan didn't see that possibility because he didn't believe someone in Ethan's position would ever choose honesty over survival. As the city lights streaked past the car windows, Jonathan replayed the moment he had stepped past Ethan. There had been something familiar about the tone in the man's voice. Something tired. Something broken. He pushed the thought away. He didn't like remembering that once. He too had experienced helplessness. When Emily got sick, when her small body weakened, when the doctors spoke in cautious phrases and guarded statistics. Jonathan had felt powerless in a way that no amount of wealth could shield him from. For 2 years he lived a double life, the public persona of a successful CEO, and the private agony of a father holding his dying child. After Emily passed, he built emotional walls higher than his skyscrapers. He told himself people on the street had made their beds. He told himself life was fair to those who worked hard. He told himself the world was orderly and predictable, because believing otherwise felt like opening a wound he could never close. Empathy became dangerous, compassion became a threat. Sorrow became something he refused to feel. And so when Jonathan walked past Ethan, he didn't see a man fighting for his daughter. He saw a reflection of the pain he refused to confront. Turning away was easier, it always had been. As he approached his gated driveway, Jonathan's phone buzzed. A reminder popped up: Emily's birthday tomorrow. He froze, fingers tightening around the steering wheel. He sat motionless for several seconds, staring at the screen until the reminder faded. He turned off the phone, pulled into the garage, and sat in silence. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in years. But something in his chest twisted sharply. Tomorrow he would wake up, attend meetings, sign contracts, move money, and remind himself he was fine, that he had moved on, that he was untouchable. He didn't know that at that exact moment, the man he dismissed as irrelevant was holding his lost wallet, holding the last photograph of Emily, and preparing to walk miles the next morning to return it. Jonathan believed he had control over his entire life. He didn't realize that fate was already moving pieces he couldn't see, preparing to bring Ethan, Lily, and the memory of his daughter crashing back into his world in a way that would strip away every wall he had built. Everything was about to change, and the next time Jonathan looked into Ethan's eyes, he would no longer be able to pretend the man was invisible. The next morning arrived colder than expected, the kind of chill that seeped through Ethan's thin jacket and made Lily whimper against his chest. He had barely slept, not because of noise or discomfort, he was used to those, but because of the weight of what he intended to do. Returning the wallet was the easy part. Walking nearly 8 miles to the skyscraper listed on Jonathan Reed's business card was the real challenge, especially with a baby who hadn't had a proper meal since yesterday afternoon. Yet Ethan didn't hesitate. He tightened the straps of his worn-out backpack, tucked Lily securely into her sling, and started moving as the first streaks of dawn lit up the Los Angeles skyline. The streets were quieter at this hour. Delivery trucks rumbled past. A few joggers in bright athletic wear trotted along, avoiding eye contact. A street cleaner pushed a broom without glancing up. Ethan had learned over the months how to become invisible even while walking in plain sight. Nobody questioned a homeless man heading downtown. Most people simply assumed he belonged to whatever destination misery dragged him toward. But Ethan was walking with purpose this time, each step driven by something steadier than desperation. It wasn't hope. Not exactly. It was conviction, a belief that doing the right thing still mattered, even if the world treated him like it didn't. Halfway through the journey, Lily began fussing again. Ethan stopped near a gas station, bought a small bottle of water with the last 2 crumpled dollars he had left, and tried to soothe her. The cold air nipped at her cheeks, turning them pink. "Hang in there, sweetheart," he whispered, bouncing her lightly. "We're going to figure this out." He wished he had more to give her: warmth, food, a safe bed, but all he had was movement, and so he kept going. His shoes, once sturdy work boots, now had soles worn thin enough that he could feel every crack in the sidewalk. His shoulders ached from carrying Lily for hours each day. But he moved anyway, walking past coffee shops filled with people checking emails over lats, past boutiques preparing window displays, past construction workers starting their shifts. To them he was part of the scenery, familiar, unremarkable, forgettable. The closer he got to downtown, the taller the buildings grew. Glass towers reflected the early sun, shimmering like polished monuments of wealth. Ethan couldn't help glancing up at them. He used to fix vac units in buildings like these. Back then he wore a uniform and carried a toolbox. People held doors open for him because he looked like someone who belonged. Now he kept his head down, hoping no one would chase him away for loitering. When the Reed Development's tower finally came into view, Ethan stopped for a moment, stunned by its size. 40 floors of steel, glass, and prestige pierced the sky, dwarfing everything around it. The entrance resembled a hotel more than an office building: wide marble steps, polished silver railings, and 2 uniformed security guards standing at attention. Ethan shifted Lily gently, brushing crumbs from her blanket, and checked the wallet once more. He hadn't touched the cash. He hadn't even counted it again. The photograph of Jonathan and his daughter rested inside, tucked carefully in its slot. Ethan didn't know why, but he felt protective of it. That picture represented something fragile, something private, something he shouldn't have seen but couldn't forget. Taking a deep breath, he headed toward the entrance. He didn't even make it to the marble steps before one of the security guards raised a hand. "Sir, you can't be here." Ethan stopped. He had prepared himself for this. "I'm not asking for money. I just need to return something." The guard eyed his clothes, the baby sling across his chest, the backpack held together with duct tape. His expression hardened. "This building isn't open to the public. There's a shelter 3 blocks down." "I'm not looking for a shelter," Ethan said carefully. "The CO here, Mr. Jonathan Reed, he dropped his wallet last night. I picked it up. I'm here to give it back." The second guard, older and more patient, stepped forward. "Let me see it." Ethan hesitated. If they took it, would Jonathan ever know he tried to return it? Would they assume he stole it? Would they call the police? He kept his tone steady. "I need to hand it to him personally. It has things that matter in it." The guards exchanged a look. The younger one, clearly skeptical, crossed his arms. "People try scams like this all the time. You claim you found something, demand to see the boss, and then ask for a reward. I don't want a reward, Ethan insisted. Just tell him Ethan is here. He'll want this back. Lily started crying, a small, sharp wail that drew annoyed glances from employees walking past. Ethan rocked her gently, murmuring apologies to her, embarrassed. The older guard softened slightly. He reached for his radio. Let me check. What's your name again? Ethan Miller. And you say you have Mr. Reed's wallet? Yes, sir. The guard nodded toward the younger one, who watched Ethan suspiciously but said nothing. After a moment the radio crackled. The voice from the lobby desk replied, Mr. Reed is in a meeting. He can't be interrupted. Ethan's heart sank. He tightened his hold on Lily. The guard lifted the radio again. The man says it's urgent. A longer pause followed. Ethan could feel the tension building, employees slowing down just enough to stare at him as they passed. He hated the feeling of being a spectacle, but he held his ground. Finally the radio buzzed. He said to wait. He's coming down in a few minutes. The older guard exhaled. All right, stay here. Don't block the entrance. Ethan nodded gratefully. He stepped aside, bouncing Lily as her crying slowly quieted. His nerves twisted. Jonathan Reed was coming. The same man who looked at him last night like he didn't exist had decided to face him today. Ethan wasn't sure what to expect: suspicion, anger, gratitude, or maybe just annoyance. 5 minutes felt like an hour. People stepped around him with irritation, careful not to let their expensive suits brush his worn jacket. Lily clutched his shirt with her tiny hands, her breathing uneven but calmer now. Ethan whispered, "We're doing the right thing, baby girl. I promise." Then the doors slid open. Jonathan Reed emerged with brisk, polished authority, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. His eyes swept the area before landing on Ethan. Recognition flashed, followed by something sharper: unease, maybe even embarrassment. He approached slowly, his posture rigid. "You," Jonathan said, not quite a greeting. "You re the guy from last night?" Ethan swallowed. "Yes, sir. You dropped this?" He pulled out the wallet with both hands, careful and respectful, like he was handling something fragile. Jonathan took it quickly, almost defensively. He opened it, flipping through each section with precise movements: cards, cash, IDs, the photograph. Ethan saw the moment Jonathan's expression changed just slightly as he reached the picture of his daughter. The CO's shoulders stiffened and his jaw set. "It's all here," Jonathan said quietly, almost surprised. "I told you," Ethan replied, keeping his voice polite. "I didn't take anything." Jonathan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled out a few bills, hundreds, clearly ready to hand them over as a reward. Ethan stepped back. "No, thank you. I didn't come for money." Jonathan frowned. "Then why did you come?" Ethan glanced at Lily, then at the towering building behind Jonathan. His stomach tightened. He wasn't ready for the question that would follow, nor the request he knew he needed to make. Returning the wallet was only the beginning. But once Jonathan asked again, "What do you want, Mr. Miller?" Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He didn't want charity. He didn't want cash. He wanted a chance to save his daughter, even if that meant asking the impossible. And so the next chapter of their lives began with a single breath and a single truth Ethan never imagined he'd speak aloud. Jonathan waited for Ethan's answer with a growing mixture of impatience and confusion. He wasn't used to situations he couldn't categorize within seconds. Most people either wanted something from him or feared him. Yet the ragged man standing in front of him holding a baby who looked far too cold and far too hungry didn't fit either pattern. Ethan shifted his weight, keeping Lily close to his chest as she squirmed softly beneath her blanket. He ran a trembling hand across her back, drawing strength from the feel of her small body. Finally he looked up at the CO towering over him and spoke with a voice that was steady but undeniably strained. "Mr. Reed," he said, "I didn't walk all this way to ask for money. I need something else, something bigger." Jonathan blinked, taken aback. Bigger than cash, bigger than the reward he had already offered. He crossed his arms, bracing himself. "What exactly is it that you want?" "Miller." Ethan inhaled deeply, the cold morning air burning his lungs. He had rehearsed this 100 times in his mind, but saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. Still, he forced the words out. "I need you to take care of my daughter." Jonathan froze. For a moment, all sound in the bustling plaza around them, the traffic, the hurried footsteps, the distant hum of city life seemed to blur into the background. His jaw tightened as he stared at Ethan, searching for some indication that this was a joke or a ploy. But Ethan looked deadly serious, desperate. Exhausted, come again, Jonathan said, his voice low and incredulous. Ethan swallowed hard. Not forever. Just for a little while, a week. Maybe 2. Long enough for me to get healthy, find work, get us off the streets. Jonathan stepped back as if the request had physically struck him. His eyes flashed with something dark and defensive. No. Absolutely not. Do you have any idea what you were asking? I do, Ethan replied quietly. I know exactly what I'm asking, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't the only chance I had left. Lily began fussing again, her cries soft but urgent. Ethan rocked her, whispering gently, but his voice cracked under the weight of emotion. She's getting worse, he continued. She hasn't had proper formula in 2 days. I think she has a cold. I'm sick too. I can feel it getting worse every day. Jonathan's expression hardened. There are shelters, social workers, programs for situations like yours. Ethan shook his head. They'll separate us. I've seen it happen again and again. If they think I'm too sick to take care of her, they'll take her away. I can't let that happen. Jonathan ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, exasperated. He wasn't heartless, not entirely, but this was crossing a line he wasn't prepared to even approach. Miller, I'm not a foster home. I'm not equipped to care for an infant. And I don't even know you. Ethan's voice tightened as he spoke. I know it sounds insane. But I saw the picture in your wallet, you with your daughter. The way you smiled at her. Jonathan's eyes snapped up sharply. You had no right to go through my personal items. I wasn't snooping, Ethan said quickly. I just saw it when I checked for ID. And I could tell you loved her. That's the only reason I'm standing here asking you this. Because I know you understand what it means to love your child more than anything. Jonathan's breathing grew uneven. The mention of Emily pierced through the emotional armor he had spent years building. Pain flickered across his face, raw and unguarded for a single moment before he crushed it beneath control. Stop. You don't know anything about me. Or my daughter. I know loss when I see it, Ethan said softly. And I know love. That's enough. Jonathan turned away, gripping the railing so hard his knuckles went white. He didn't want this conversation. He didn't want any reminder of the past. But Ethan continued, voice trembling. Please, I'm begging you. I don't want money. I don't want a handout. I just want Lily to be safe while I try to get better. Jonathan stayed silent, fighting the urge to tell him to leave. He almost did. But then Lily let out a sharp, coughing cry, weak, tired, the sound of a baby who had endured far too much for her age. Jonathan glanced over his shoulder. The sight of her small face streaked red from crying. Something shifted inside him. Something he thought he had buried with Emily. Still he fought it. Miller, Jonathan said slowly, you can't expect a stranger to take your child. Ethan nodded. I know. But I also know you not just some stranger. You a father. Jonathan's heart lurched painfully. The memory of Emily's small hand in his. The way she giggled when he carried her on his shoulders. The way her hospital bed smelled of antiseptic and strawberry shampoo, it all hit him in a wave, so sudden he nearly lost his breath. Don't, Jonathan managed, voice rough. Don't bring her into this. I'm not trying to hurt you, Ethan said gently. I'm trying to show you that you are the only person I can trust with Lily. Because you loved your daughter the way I love mine. Jonathan covered his mouth with his hand, exhaling sharply. He hated that Ethan's words struck deep, that the stranger before him could see straight through to the wound he guarded like a secret. This isn't possible, Jonathan muttered. Even if I wanted to help, and I'm not saying I do, I can't just take a child home with me. That's not how the world works. Ethan took a step forward, swaying slightly from weakness. Then don't take her home. Take us. Just for a week. I won't be in your way. I'll stay out of your sight. I just need somewhere safe to recover. Somewhere Lily won't freeze at night. Jonathan's breath hitched. No one had asked him for something this human in years. Everything in his life was business, contracts, obligations. But this was raw, unfiltered need. The kind he once would have done anything to satisfy for Emily. He glanced at Ethan again. The man was pale, unsteady sweat beading his forehead despite the cold. His breathing sounded strained. He was sick, really sick. And Lily clung to him, unaware of how precarious their situation was. Jonathan's chest tightened with a familiar ache, the same one he felt the night Emily slipped away. I can't, he whispered more to himself than to Ethan. I shouldn't. But he didn't walk away. He didn't tell the guards to remove Ethan. He didn't turn cold like he usually did. He simply stood there conflicted, torn, and deeply unsettled. Ethan watched him carefully. Please, he murmured. If I collapse, there's no one else. She'll end up in the system. I can't let that happen. Jonathan's gaze fell to the pavement. A memory flashed: a small girl with curls clutching his shirt, whispering, "Daddy, don't leave me." He blinked hard. He didn't want to remember. He didn't want to feel. But he did. Against every wall he had built, he did. He looked up and met Ethan's eyes. The man was trembling, but his gaze remained steady, full of exhaustion, fear, and something Jonathan once recognized in himself: love sharpened by desperation. Jonathan exhaled shakily. 5 minutes, he said suddenly. Follow me inside, we will talk privately. Ethan almost collapsed from relief. As Jonathan turned toward the doors, the guard stared in shock. And just like that, the impossible began to shift toward possible. Ethan didn't know it yet. Jonathan didn't either. But this was the moment their lives started to intertwine forever. Ethan followed Jonathan through the revolving glass doors, his pulse thudding with each step. The lobby of Reed Developments felt like another universe: marble floors polished enough to reflect the ceiling lights, towering columns, a front desk staffed by 2 impeccably dressed receptionists, and employees gliding through the space with the quiet confidence of people whose lives were far removed from desperation. Ethan clutched Lily a little closer, suddenly hyper-aware of every stain on his jacket and every tear in the fabric of her blanket. But Lily didn't care about appearances. She shifted against him, letting out a small cry that echoed faintly through the grand lobby. A few employees gave quick, judgmental glances, but Jonathan ignored them, walking briskly toward a private bank of elevators reserved for executives. Over here, Jonathan said as he pressed his badge to the access panel. The elevator doors slid open, and he stepped inside without waiting. Ethan hesitated only a moment before following. The doors closed, sealing them off from the stairs in the lobby. For the first few seconds, neither man spoke. The hum of the elevator filled the space as they ascended, floor by floor. Ethan's nerves tightened each time Lily whimpered. He rocked her gently, hoping she wouldn't start crying again. His throat felt dry. "Thank you for giving me a chance to explain," he finally said, his voice quiet but sincere. Jonathan didn't look at him. His gaze remained fixed on the elevator numbers. "This isn't a chance, it's a conversation," he replied. "Don't mistake one for the other." Ethan nodded, accepting that. He wasn't in a position to demand anything. When the doors opened on the 15th floor, Jonathan gestured for him to follow. The hallway was lined with frosted glass offices and modern artwork. Everything felt sterile, expensive, and intimidating. Jonathan led Ethan into a medium-sized conference room at the end of the corridor. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Los Angeles, a long table made of dark wood, and leather chairs arranged with precision. Jonathan closed the door behind them, though not gently, and turned toward Ethan with a restrained frustration that had been simmering since the plaza. "All right," Jonathan said, removing his suit jacket and tossing it across the table. "Talk, and tell me why on earth you think what you're asking is even remotely reasonable." Ethan took a breath, steadying himself. He gently adjusted Lily's blanket as she stared around the room with wide, unfocused eyes. "I know it's unreasonable," Ethan admitted. "I know it's insane. I know you don't owe me anything. But I'm out of options, and I can't let Lily get taken away from me." Jonathan crossed his arms, waiting. "If I go to a hospital," Ethan continued, "they'll see how sick I am. They'll see how underweight she is. They'll call Child Protective Services. I've watched it happen to people I knew on the street. Once she goes into the system, I'll lose her. And she's all I have left." Jonathan studied him, not kindly, but intensely. He scrutinized Ethan's posture, his eyes, the way he held his daughter. Ethan didn't look like a man plotting manipulation. He looked like a man barely holding himself together. "You said you were sick," Jonathan said. "How sick?" Ethan exhaled shakily. "It started as a cough a few weeks ago, then fevers. I've been freezing at night even when it's not that cold. My chest hurts all the time. Sometimes I cough until I can't breathe." He hesitated before adding the part that scared him most. "Yesterday morning, I coughed up blood." Jonathan's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough to signal concern. "You need medical attention immediately," he said. "If you collapse out there, your daughter will be in far more danger than if you went to a shelter." Ethan knew this already, but fear had kept him away. "If I had somewhere safe to recover," he said, "just for a little while I could get better. I could find work again. I used to fix vac systems. I was good at it. I just need time to get stable without losing her." Jonathan walked toward the windows, staring out at the city as though hoping it would offer him an answer. "Do you understand what you re-asking of me?" he said without turning around. "To bring a stranger and a baby into my home. Do you know the liability, the risk?" Ethan nodded. "I do, that's why I haven't asked anyone else. Because I saw that picture in your wallet and I knew you were someone who would protect a child." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He didn't like being read so easily. "Emily would have been 15 this year," Jonathan said quietly, almost reluctantly. "She died of leukemia when she was 12. Ethan's heart clenched. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. Jonathan waved the apology off with a stiff gesture. "You mentioned that picture. That smile. You rewrite I loved her. More than anything in the world. And losing her nearly destroyed me." He paused. "But that doesn't mean I can save your child. I'm not a replacement. I'm not responsible for you. I'm not asking you to replace anyone," Ethan said gently. "And I'm not asking you to be responsible for me. I'm asking for a place where Lily won't freeze. Where I can sleep without worrying someone will try to take her or hurt us. Where I can get strong again." Lily let out a tiny cough, and Jonathan's eyes flicked toward her involuntarily. He didn't move closer, but something softened in his posture. Ethan saw it, the very shift he had been hoping for. "How long?" Jonathan asked in a clipped tone. "1 week," Ethan replied immediately. "Just 1 week. If I'm not better by then, if I can't stand on my own, then you can call CPs yourself. I won't fight it. I just need 7 days without the street trying to kill me." Jonathan turned fully, meeting Ethan's eyes. The baby in his arms shifted, letting out a small whimper that sounded too fragile for the cavernous conference room. Jonathan's expression was one Ethan couldn't quite rid: anger, pain, hesitation, compassion, grief, all tangled together. Finally, Jonathan spoke. "You re-asking me to do something I swore I'd never do again: open my home to a child who isn't mine." Ethan's heart pounded. "I know," he whispered. "But I think part of you already wants to say yes." Jonathan's breath caught. The truth of Ethan's words hit harder than he expected. He saw Lily's tiny fingers clutch Ethan's shirt, saw her red cheeks, saw a child who looked frighteningly vulnerable the way Emily had once been. "I shouldn't do this," Jonathan said, but the firmness in his voice was fading. "Maybe not," Ethan agreed. "But if you don't, I don't know what happens to her tonight." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, fighting the weight of the choice before him. When he opened them again, the exhaustion and pain in them were unmistakable. "1 week," he said finally. "You stay in the guest house behind my property. I will have my doctor examine you. After 7 days you leave, no exceptions." Ethan nearly collapsed from relief. Tears stung his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." Jonathan held up a hand. "Don't thank me yet. This isn't charity. It's a temporary arrangement. And when the week is over, you and your daughter move on." Ethan nodded, understanding the terms. But deep inside, he felt something else, a quiet certainty that this was the beginning of the second chance he had been praying for. Jonathan didn't know it, not yet. But letting Ethan and Lily into his world would unravel the loneliness he'd wrapped around himself for years. And as he opened the conference room door and gestured for Ethan to follow, neither of them realized that the next 7 days would change the rest of their lives. The ride to Jonathan's home felt unreal to Ethan. He sat in the back seat of Jonathan's sleek black SUV, Lily cradled carefully against his chest, while Jonathan rode in silence in the front with his driver navigating through Los Angeles traffic. Ethan kept his eyes on the passing scenery: gleaming storefronts, palm trees swaying in the breeze, manicured parks, the rolling hills of Beverly Hills inching closer. Each mile that separated them from Sunset Boulevard felt like stepping further out of the life he'd been trapped in for months. But with every mile, anxiety twisted harder in his chest. This wasn't his world. This was Jonathan's world: clean, controlled, expensive, intimidating. Ethan feared that one wrong move would shatter the fragile agreement Jonathan had offered him. Yet Lily's soft breaths against his neck grounded him. She was the reason he was here. She was the reason he had dared to ask for the impossible. Jonathan's property sat behind tall iron gates that slid open automatically when the SUV approached. The driveway curved past a carefully landscaped garden of trimmed hedges and white roses, leading toward a massive 2-story home with stone accents and towering windows. But Ethan's eyes drifted past the main house to a smaller structure in the back, a guest house, more beautiful than any place he'd lived in his entire adult life. The SUV parked in front of it, and Jonathan stepped out first, straightening his suit jacket as he spoke to Ethan over the roof of the car. "This is where you'll be staying," he said. "The main house is off limits unless I explicitly say otherwise. You keep to the guest house." "Understood." Ethan nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." Jonathan gave a curt nod, then motioned toward the front door of the guest house. "Donna will bring clean sheets, food, and supplies. My doctor will be here within an hour to examine you." Ethan swallowed hard, emotion swelling in his throat. No one had cared enough to send a doctor after him in months. He lifted Lily from the car, holding her close as he approached the guest house. Jonathan unlocked the door and gestured for Ethan to enter first. The moment Ethan stepped inside, he nearly lost his balance. The interior was small but beautiful, warm wooden floors, a soft cream-colored couch, a kitchenette with stainless steel appliances, a neatly made bed tucked into the corner. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, illuminating dust in the air like drifting fragments of gold. Ethan felt overwhelmed. It had been so long since he had stood in a real home, one with heat, running water, clean linens, and a roof that didn't threaten to collapse. He had forgotten what safety felt like. "You will stay here for the week," Jonathan said. "Donna will make sure you have everything you need. But you need to follow the rules. You rest, you eat, you take the medications my doctor prescribes, and you avoid causing any disruptions." "I will," Ethan said. "I promise." Jonathan studied him for a moment, his expression guarded. He didn't trust this man, yet not fully. But something in Ethan's voice, something in the way he held Lily with such protectiveness and tenderness, kept Jonathan from retreating back into his cold, default indifference. "You should also know," Jonathan added, lowering his voice, "I am doing this because I believe every child deserves safety. Don't make me regret this decision." Ethan shook his head quickly. "I won't. I swear." Jonathan nodded once more, as though sealing the agreement, then stepped back toward the door. "Get some rest before the doctor arrives." But as Jonathan turned to leave, Ethan called softly, "Mr. Reed." Jonathan paused. "Yes." Ethan hesitated. "Thank you. I know this isn't easy for you." Something flickered across Jonathan's face, an emotion Ethan couldn't name. Then the CEO of Reed Developments simply nodded and walked out, closing the door behind him. For a long moment, Ethan just stood there, clutching Lily as he looked around the guest house. The quiet felt surreal. Every breath he took filled his lungs with warm, clean air instead of car fumes or dust. He set Lily down gently on the couch and touched the cushions. Soft, warm, real. He wanted to collapse from relief, but he forced himself to focus. He needed to keep Lily warm, give her some bottled formula if Diane brought any, and try to rest before the doctor arrived. He stepped into the bathroom to splash water on his face, and when he looked into the mirror, he hardly recognized himself. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, cracked lips, a grayish tint to his skin, he looked like a man who hadn't lived but survived. Lily's cries pulled him back, and he hurried to her side. She reached for him, her hands trembling with hunger. "I know, sweetheart," he whispered. "Food is coming. We okay. We safe for now." Minutes later, a gentle knock sounded at the door. Ethan opened it cautiously to find a woman in her early 60s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back neatly. She wore a soft cardigan and carried a basket overflowing with food, formula, diapers, blankets, and toiletries. "You must be Miller," she said warmly. "I'm Donna. I've worked for Mr. Reed for 25 years. Let me help you get settled." Ethan stepped aside instantly, grateful beyond words. She moved through the guest house with practiced ease, changing the sheets, warming a bottle for Lily, placing fresh towels in the bathroom. "Reed doesn't usually bring guests here," Donna said gently. "But he called me this morning and insisted we prepare everything right away. That's rare for him." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," she assured him. "If anything, it's good for him to take a step like this. He needs reminders of compassion." The bottle warmed. Donna handed it to Ethan. When Lily drank, her small body relaxing against her father, Ethan felt tears fill his eyes. Relief tasted almost sweet. After months of scraping by, protecting her with nothing but determination, seeing her eat safely in a warm room felt like a miracle. "She's beautiful," Donna said softly. "She reminds me of Emily." Ethan looked up, his daughter. Donna nodded. "She passed away 3 years ago. He hasn't been the same since. He closed himself off, stopped letting people in. But you and your little girl, maybe you something he didn't know he needed." Before Ethan could respond, another knock announced the arrival of Jonathan's personal physician. and as the doctor entered, as Ethan prepared to be examined and confront the truth about his failing health, he realized that stepping through Jonathan Reed's doors had been more than a desperate request for temporary shelter. It had been the beginning of a fragile connection, one that would reshape both of their lives in ways neither man could yet imagine. Dr. Harris arrived with the calm efficiency of a man who had been Jonathan's personal physician for over a decade. He was in his early 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a quiet authority that filled the room the moment he stepped inside. Ethan tensed instinctively, clutching Lily a little closer as the doctor set down his medical bag. He wasn't afraid of doctors, not exactly. But hospitals and medical exams had always carried the threat of intervention that could separate him from his daughter. Still, he reminded himself that this wasn't a shelter intake or a CPS evaluation. This was Jonathan's doctor, summoned because Jonathan had insisted Ethan needed medical attention. It was different. It had to be. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Harris said as he extended a hand. "Jonathan told me you've been having trouble breathing, severe coughing, and fevers. Why don't you sit down and let me take a look?" Ethan nodded, feeling suddenly embarrassed by his own appearance. He guided Lily gently onto the couch, where she was now full after her bottle and slipping into a soft, steady sleep. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling as the doctor examined him. A stethoscope pressed against his chest. Deep breaths, slow exhale, paperwork filled out, questions about symptoms and timelines. Ethan answered everything honestly, though he downplayed some of the pain, an old habit he couldn't shake. The doctor listened, frowned slightly at his lungs' rattling sound, then took his temperature and blood pressure. When Dr. Harris finally stepped back, the look on his face was far more serious than Ethan had hoped. "You're dealing with advanced pneumonia," he said. "Possibly bacterial. Your lungs are inflamed and your oxygen levels are lower than they should be." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "Can it be treated?" "Yes," the doctor replied, "but not on the streets. Not with the level of exposure and malnutrition your body has endured. If Jonathan hadn't brought you here, your condition could have become life-threatening within days." The words hit Ethan like a blow. He wasn't surprised. He had known deep down that something was very wrong, but hearing it confirmed left him shaken. He thought about Lily, about how close she had come to losing him. He swallowed hard, his voice tight. "What do I need to do?" Dr. Harris opened his bag and began preparing medication. "We will start with strong antibiotics, rest, hydration, and consistent meals. I'll check in daily, and if anything worsens, I'll admit you to the hospital." Ethan paled at the word hospital, and the doctor must have noticed. "Don't worry," Dr. Harris added gently. "Jonathan made it very clear your daughter stays with you. No one is taking her anywhere." Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It was the first time in months anyone had addressed his fears without judgment. The doctor packed up his equipment. "Get some sleep. You'll feel worse before you feel better, but you're in a safe place now. That's what matters." With a final nod, Dr. Harris left the guest house. As the door closed, Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, breathing slowly through the tightness in his chest. His entire body felt like it had been stitched together with fatigue. But when he looked over at Lily sleeping peacefully on the couch for the first time in days, he felt something warm swell in his chest. Relief, hope, even if fragile. He lay back on the bed, intending only to rest for a moment, but exhaustion washed over him so fast it was like being pulled underwater. Within seconds, he was asleep. Hours later, Ethan woke to the sound of someone knocking lightly on the door. He blinked groggily, his fever making everything hazy. When he opened the door, Jonathan stood outside, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Behind him, the sun had begun its descent, casting an amber glow across the garden. "How are you feeling?" Jonathan asked, though the tone suggested he wasn't sure why he cared. Ethan cleared his throat. "Tired, but better. The doctor said the medicine should start working soon." Jonathan nodded. "Good. Donna tells me Lily ate well earlier. She seems to be adjusting." Ethan smiled weakly. "She's warm, she's fed. That's more than I could have given her out there." Jonathan walked a few steps into the guest house, scanning the space with a critical eye, gauging the level of order, the condition of the furniture, the progress of the man he'd taken in. It wasn't distrust exactly, but a need for control, a need to understand what he had allowed into his carefully structured life. "I told Dr. Harris to come by again tomorrow," Jonathan said. "And Donna will bring dinner soon." She prepared enough for both of you. Ethan nodded gratefully. Thank you, truly. But Jonathan didn't accept the gratitude. Instead, he looked at Ethan the way someone examines a fracture in a piece of glass, expecting it to widen at any moment. This arrangement is temporary, Jonathan reminded him. 1 week. After that, we revisit what happens next. Ethan lowered his eyes. I know, I won't forget. For a moment, a quiet shift passed between them, not warmth, but not hostility either. Something complicated, something new. Jonathan glanced at Lily, her tiny fingers curled into fists as she slept. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough that Ethan noticed. A softness flickered, quickly buried. She looks, Jonathan began, then stopped, as if afraid of finishing the sentence. Ethan finished it for him. She looks safe. Jonathan's jaw tightened. For now. He turned toward the door, clearly intending to leave, but hesitated. Mr. Miller, he said quietly. Ethan looked up. Yes, sir. You asked me for something no stranger has ever asked, Jonathan said. But I need to know one thing. Why did you take the money? Ethan blinked. The money in your wallet. Yes, Jonathan said. $8,500. You could be disappeared with it. No one would be found you. Ethan thought about the night he found the wallet. The weight of temptation. The photo of Jonathan and his daughter. He straightened his back and answered simply, because Lily deserves a father who chooses what's right even when it's hard. Jonathan stared at him, the answer hitting him deeper than he expected. Something in his expression cracked, not visibly, but internally, in a place he had locked away for 3 years. Without another word, he stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Ethan sat on the bed, heart pounding. This house, this man, this fragile deal, it was all more than he had ever hoped for. But it was also dangerous. Not in the way the streets were dangerous, but in a way that made his chest achy. He was beginning to believe in possibilities again. And Jonathan, whether he realized it or not, was beginning to remember what it felt like to care about someone small and vulnerable. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the guest house filled with warm lamplight, Ethan watched Lily sleep peacefully. He felt the weight of his illness, the uncertainty of their future, and the strangeness of living on borrowed time. But for the first time in months, he also felt something else, something steady and grounding. He felt safe. And he had no idea this safety was the first step toward a bond that would reshape the lives of all 3 of them. The next morning arrived with a softness Ethan hadn't felt in months. Sunlight filtered through the guesthouse curtains in pale golden strips, warming the room enough that he didn't wake up shivering for the first time since he could remember. His chest still felt heavy, each breath thick with the remnants of pneumonia, but the stabbing pain had eased. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake Lily, who was curled beside him in the small bed, her tiny hand clutching the fabric of his shirt as if afraid he might disappear. Ethan brushed a gentle thumb over her cheek. Her skin was warmer, her color healthier than it had been on the streets. Just seeing her like this filled him with a gratitude so intense he wasn't sure how to hold it. He eased out of bed to start the morning, though the doctor had insisted he take things slowly. Even walking across the room felt like moving through water. He reached the kitchenette, filled a small glass of water, and took the prescribed antibiotics. The bitterness lingered on his tongue, but hope, something he had forced himself to stop believing in, began to stir quietly inside him. He didn't dare say it out loud, not even to himself, but part of him felt that maybe things really could get better. A soft knock came at the door. Ethan opened it to find Donna standing outside with a warm smile and a tray filled with oatmeal, fruit, scrambled eggs, and a bottle already prepared for Lily. Good morning, Mr. Miller, she greeted. Jonathan had an early meeting, but he asked me to check on you both. Ethan blinked in surprise. He asked. Donna nodded, stepping inside as she set the tray on the small table. He did. He pretends he's not worried, but I've worked for that man long enough to see what he hides. She glanced at the sleeping baby. He's been watching the house since dawn, checking to see if your lights were on. A lump formed in Ethan's throat. It was difficult to imagine Jonathan Reed, the man who strode through skyscrapers like he owned the sky, standing at a window wondering if a homeless father and his newborn were all right. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I don't know how to thank him, or you. Donna waved him off gently. You don't need to thank me. And as for Jonathan, he hasn't allowed anyone to help him heal in years. Maybe this is good for him, too. After breakfast, Lily woke with a soft grunt and a stretch, blinking owlishly at the new environment. Ethan lifted her into his arms, inhaling the sweet smell of baby formula and warm blankets. "Good morning, little one," he murmured. Lily cooed, reaching up to touch his face. Donna watched with a tender smile. "She adores you," she said. "That kind of bond is rare." Ethan let out a breath that trembled slightly. "She's all I have." Her mom, she didn't make it. Donna's expression softened. "I'm sorry," truly Ethan nodded. He didn't go into detail. The memory was too raw. Her sudden complications during childbirth, the medical bills, the grief that swallowed him whole. He focused instead on adjusting Lily in his arms. "I'm doing my best for her." "You are," Donna said, touching his shoulder lightly. "And she feels it." As the morning continued, Ethan attempted small chores around the guesthouse, tidying blankets, washing bottles, folding the clothes Donna had brought. His body protested each movement. Sweat built along his hairline. His chest crackled with every breath. When he paused, bracing himself against the counter, he realized he had pushed too far. He was still weak. But before he could sit, the door opened again. This time, Jonathan stepped inside. He wore a gray suit and carried a leather portfolio. The air shifted instantly, clean, crisp, controlled, like he brought the atmosphere of a boardroom with him. Yet there was something different in his eyes today. Something less guarded, more searching. "Good," Jonathan said, scanning Ethan. "You reawake?" Ethan straightened. "Yes, sir." Jonathan's gaze flicked briefly to Lily, who stared at him with wide blue eyes. He hesitated before stepping closer. "How is she?" he asked. Ethan couldn't help smiling down at his daughter. "Better, much better." Something unspoken passed across Jonathan's face. Not joy, not exactly, but a softening, like a man trying to remember what it felt like to care. He cleared his throat. Harris told me your lungs are still in bad shape. You need to rest. That's non-negotiable." Ethan nodded. "I will. Thank you." Jonathan's brow furrowed. "Stop thanking me. I'm not doing anything extraordinary." Donna, who was still nearby, raised a single eyebrow at him. "You opened your home to a stranger and his infant. That's extraordinary." Jonathan shot her a look, but she didn't flinch. Ethan hid a smile. Jonathan turned back to Ethan. "If you need anything, medicine, food, baby supplies, tell Donna. Don't try to handle everything yourself." Ethan felt a warmth grow in his chest, unfamiliar and disorienting. "I will. I promise." Jonathan nodded stiffly, then stepped away from the bed where Lily lay. But as he reached the doorway, she let out a sudden, soft squeal, the kind babies make when they want attention. Jonathan froze. He turned slowly to find Lily reaching toward him, her fingers flexing in a little grasping motion. She giggled. The sound pierced him. Ethan saw it clearly, the exact moment Jonathan's breath caught, the exact second his carefully reinforced walls cracked. It was as though he were looking at Emily again in some tiny, innocent way. Jonathan's hand twitched as if he wanted to reach back but didn't know how. His voice lowered. "She has a strong spirit." Ethan chuckled. "Gets it from her mom." The two men stood there in a strange, fragile moment, a moment that existed somewhere between memory and possibility. Jonathan cleared his throat abruptly, almost shaking himself. "I have a meeting. Donna will check in this afternoon." And then he left quickly, as though staying any longer might unravel him. When the door closed, Donna let out a small sigh. "He's changing," she murmured. "I didn't think I'd ever see him soften like this again." Ethan glanced down at Lily. "She's doing it," he said quietly. "Not me." Donna shook her head. "It's both of you." He needed a reason to feel again. She packed up her tray and moved toward the exit. "Rest, Ethan. Today is only day 2. A lot can happen in a week." After she left, Ethan sat on the bed, Lily nestled against his chest. He stared at the door Jonathan had walked through. Something in the man's eyes stayed with him, not pity, not obligation, but recognition. It scared Ethan a little. It also comforted him. He didn't know what the rest of the week would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like the path he was on might lead somewhere better. For him. For Lily. And unexpectedly, for Jonathan Reed as well. By the 4th day in the guesthouse, Ethan had begun to feel something unfamiliar: strength. Not much of it, not enough to walk far or carry anything heavy, but enough that his breaths didn't scrape painfully in his chest, and his coughing had finally softened. Harris visited each morning, adjusting medications and reminding him repeatedly that rest was not optional. Donna checked in throughout the day with food, blankets, small toys for Lily, and a warmth Ethan had almost forgotten people were capable of offering. Yet despite the growing sense of safety, Ethan couldn't relax completely. He knew this arrangement had an expiration date. Jonathan had made it clear 1 week. After that, Ethan was on his own again. The thought weighed on him heavy as concrete, but he pushed it aside for now. Lily needed him present, not spiraling into fear. On the 4th afternoon, while Ethan was folding freshly washed baby clothes on the couch, a commotion outside caught his attention. Footsteps, quick, agitated, approached the guest house. Voices followed. One belonged to Jonathan, clipped and sharp. The other was unfamiliar, louder, tinged with frustration. Ethan stiffened. He lifted Lily from her blanket and held her protectively as the door swung open without warning. A man in his early 40s stepped inside, wearing a tailored suit and carrying an expensive briefcase. His hair was styled immaculately, and his face bore features similar to Jonathan's, though softer and more expressive. His gaze collided with Ethan's, then dropped to Lily, and his eyebrows shot up. "You re him," the man said, pointing. "You re the guy Jonathan brought here. The one living in his guest house." Jonathan appeared behind him, jaw clenched. "Fernando, that's enough. Get outside." "No," Fernando shot back. "I'm not leaving until you explain what's going on. You let a complete stranger live on your property. With a baby. Do you have any idea how reckless that is?" Ethan felt his stomach twist. He hadn't expected this, but deep down, he understood. Families protect their own, even when they misunderstand the situation. Jonathan exhaled sharply and stepped between them. "He's not a threat." "You don't know that," Fernando snapped. "He could sue you, rob you, manipulate you. People do crazy things when they're desperate." Ethan's grip on Lily tightened. He swallowed hard and forced his voice steady. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just needed a place to keep my daughter safe." Fernando gave him a skeptical look before turning back to Jonathan. "I'm your brother. I deserve to know what's happening. Ever since Emily, you shut the world out. But now suddenly you retaking in strangers." The room thickened with tension. Jonathan's jaw tightened at the mention of Emily, but he didn't lash out. Instead, he spoke with a resignation that bordered on exhaustion. "He returned my wallet, with everything in it, and he asked for help. I gave him a week, that's all." Fernando stared at him, processing. The disbelief on his face slowly shifted into something else, concern, maybe even fear. "You redoing this because of her," Fernando said softly. "Because you see her and that baby." Jonathan's reaction was immediate. "Enough. You think I can't tell?" Fernando pressed. "You think I don't see how you've even looking at that child? It's the first time in years you've let someone slip through those walls of yours. And it terrifies me, Jonathan, because what happens when they leave? What happens when this week is over?" Jonathan looked away, eyes tightening. He didn't answer. Ethan watched in stunned silence, holding Lily close, unsure if he should speak or stay quiet. Fernando turned toward Ethan again, this time with less hostility and more curiosity. "Is all of this true?" he asked. "You found his wallet and didn't take the money?" Ethan nodded. "Every dollar was still there. I brought it back because it was the right thing to do." Fernando let out a slow breath. "And you re-sick?" "I was," Ethan admitted. "Still am, but getting better." "And you have nowhere to go?" "Not yet," Ethan said quietly. "But I'm trying to get back on my feet." Fernando studied him for a long moment. Then he surprised Ethan by asking, "Why didn't you go to the police when you found the wallet?" Ethan shook his head. "Because the system isn't built for people like me. They would have taken Lily if they thought I couldn't care for her. I wasn't willing to risk that." Something in Fernando's face changed, softened. He glanced back at Jonathan, and the two brothers exchanged a look that was layered with unspoken history. "Jonathan," Fernando said finally, "can I talk to you outside?" Jonathan hesitated, then nodded. Before leaving, he looked at Ethan, his expression unreadable. "Stay here. We'll be right back." The door closed behind them. Ethan sat on the couch, bouncing Lily gently, straining to hear their conversation, even though he knew he shouldn't. But the walls of the guesthouse were thick, and he heard only faint murmurs outside. Seconds stretched into minutes. His mind raced. What if Fernando convinced Jonathan to end the arrangement early? What if today was the last day of the week instead of the midpoint? What if he and Lily would be back on the streets by sundown? Just as panic began to claw at his ribs, the door opened. Jonathan stepped in first, his expression calmer than before, though still tight around the eyes. Fernando followed, his gaze softer. Ethan braced himself. Jonathan inhaled and spoke. "My brother and I had a discussion. He's less than thrilled, but he understands the situation now." Fernando stepped forward and extended a hand. I misjudged you, he said. I'm sorry, I reacted out of fear, not reason. Losing Emily broke Jonathan. I thought this was going to break him again. Ethan shook his hand, surprised by the sincerity. I understand, he replied quietly. I would do anything to protect my daughter too. Fernando nodded. If you need legal help, documents, replacement job applications, I can assist you. No cost. Ethan blinked, stunned. Are you serious? Completely, Fernando said. Consider it a sibling peace offering. And maybe a small step toward making things right for all of us. Jonathan cleared his throat and crossed his arms, not in anger this time, but as if uncomfortable with emotional vulnerability. You're safe here, he said. For the rest of the week, nothing changes. Ethan nodded with relief, but Jonathan wasn't finished. However, he added, if your health doesn't improve by then, or if Lily isn't stable enough, we'll revisit the plan. I'm not throwing you out if it means endangering her. Ethan's breath caught. Gratitude swelled in his chest. I don't know how to thank you. Jonathan looked away, his voice quieter. Just get better, that's all I ask. As Fernando left and Jonathan followed, Lily began to laugh, soft, bright, completely unexpected. The sound floated through the guest house, warm and disarming. Jonathan paused at the doorway, just long enough for Ethan to see something shift in his eyes again. Not attachment, not yet, but the beginning of something powerful and undeniable. Then Jonathan walked away before the feeling they could take root too visibly. Ethan watched him go, feeling for the first time like the week might turn into something more than borrowed time. Something neither of them were prepared for, but both of them needed. By the sixth day, something had shifted permanently inside the Reed household, though neither Jonathan nor Ethan dared acknowledge it aloud. What began as a reluctant arrangement rooted in desperation had slowly grown into a fragile rhythm, a quiet coexistence that both men felt but refused to analyze too closely. Ethan was still recovering, but his strength was returning more noticeably each morning. His lungs no longer burned with every breath, and though the cough lingered, it no longer shook his entire body. Lily thrived even faster. Her cheeks had filled out, she cooed more, and her eyes sparkled with the curiosity of a child who finally felt safe. It was her laughter, unexpected, pure, unfiltered, that now drifted through the guest house like a small, unstoppable force. And it was that laughter Jonathan couldn't ignore, no matter how hard he tried. He had found himself slowing down on his way to the garage each morning, lingering near the guesthouse window as he adjusted his tie or checked his watch, pretending he wasn't listening for Lily's babbling. He told himself he was only checking to ensure everything was in order, that the arrangement wasn't jeopardizing his routines. But deep down, he knew the truth. Lily reminded him of something he had lost, something he never expected to feel again. That morning, Jonathan stopped by the guesthouse earlier than usual. He had a meeting downtown at 10, but he arrived just after dawn, holding a small bag of children's items he'd bought on impulse the night before: a soft pink blanket, a set of pacifiers, and a stuffed rabbit with long floppy ears. He had stood in the store aisle for 20 minutes convincing himself it wasn't sentiment, just practicality. Babies needed things. He could provide them. Nothing more. When he knocked on the door, Ethan opened it slowly, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mr. Reed, is everything okay? Jonathan cleared his throat. I brought some items for the baby. Donna said you might need them. Ethan blinked at the bag, stunned. Thank you, really. That means a lot. Jonathan stepped inside and placed the items on the small dining table. Lily lay nearby on the bed, swaddled in a blanket as she stretched her tiny arms. Her gaze landed on Jonathan instantly. She gurgled with a bright, delighted squeal, as if greeting someone she recognized. Jonathan froze. A part of him wanted to look away, but something in her expression, her innocence, her trust, held him in place. He walked closer, stopping halfway between the door and the bed, unsure if he should continue. Ethan smiled slightly. You can hold her, you know, if you want. Jonathan's heart lurched. I don't think that's necessary, it's not, Ethan agreed softly. But she likes you. Jonathan exhaled sharply. She likes anyone who feeds her. Maybe, Ethan said, but she's not smiling at me right now. Jonathan turned his head, meeting Lily's eyes again. She kicked her feet, reaching out with her small fists in his direction. Ethan lifted her gently and extended her toward him. For a long, weighted moment, Jonathan didn't move. His hands twitched at his sides. His chest tightened painfully with memories: Emily's small fingers gripping his thumb, her contagious laughter. the way she used to rest her head on his shoulder. But this was not Emily, this was Lily, and something inside him understood that Lily wasn't here to replace anyone. She was here to remind him that he wasn't done being human. Slowly, hesitantly, Jonathan reached out. His hands closed around the baby with a mixture of awkwardness and tenderness. Lily settled against him instantly, making a soft humming sound as she rested her cheek on his suit jacket. Jonathan stood perfectly still, as if afraid that any movement might shatter the moment. Ethan watched with quiet astonishment. Jonathan looked down at Lily, and for the first time since this entire arrangement began, there was no hardness in his gaze, only memory. Only something deeply human he had tried to bury for 3 unbearably long years. She's light, Jonathan murmured. Ethan nodded. She's small for her age. The streets weren't good for her. But she's getting stronger. Jonathan's jaw tightened at the thought of Lily out there, hungry and cold, struggling for breath, while Ethan fought sickness alone. He couldn't stop the thought from spiraling. What if they hadn't found him in time? What if Ethan hadn't returned the wallet? What if without this intervention both of them had simply vanished into the city, unnoticed by anyone? The idea twisted something sharp inside him. Jonathan sat on the edge of the bed, still holding her. Lily stared up at him with trusting curiosity, kicking her legs gently as if testing how far her joy could reach. She's beautiful, Jonathan said quietly. Ethan smiled. I think so too. Jonathan hesitated, then added, Emily, she used to smile like that. Ethan's expression softened. I'm sure she was amazing. She was, Jonathan said, voice thickening slightly. She had this way of making everything feel brighter. Even on the worst days. He didn't speak about Emily often. Hardly ever, in fact. But holding Lily now unlocked a door inside him, one he hadn't touched since Emily died. Ethan sensed it, but he didn't pry. Kids do that, Ethan said gently. They change how you see the world. Or how you pretend not to see it, Jonathan said more bitterly. After Emily, I didn't want to feel anything again. Feeling things only made the loss worse. Lily shifted, resting a tiny hand against the buttons of Jonathan's shirt, as if trying to comfort him in the only way she knew how. Jonathan blinked rapidly. She trusts you, Ethan said softly. Kids sense real things. Jonathan didn't respond immediately, but his fingers carefully, cautiously brushed Lily's back in a protective arc. I don't know what to do with that, he admitted. You don't have to do anything, Ethan said. Just be here. That's enough. A knock startled them both. Jonathan straightened, lifting Lily with surprising naturalness now. Donna peeked in. Mitter. Reed, your driver is waiting. If you don't leave soon, you'll be late for your meeting. Jonathan reluctantly handed Lily back to Ethan, and the baby whimpered softly in protest, reaching toward him. The sound hit Jonathan like a blow. He cleared his throat, forcing composure back into his posture. I have to go, he said. Ethan nodded, of course. Jonathan turned to leave but paused at the doorway. I'll check in later tonight, he said, as if it were an obligation. But both men knew it wasn't. After he left, Ethan looked down at Lily, still warm from Jonathan's arms. You re-getting to him, he whispered. And he doesn't even know what to do about it. Lily cooed, proud of herself. Ethan chuckled weakly, though worry tugged at him. He knew this was dangerous, not because Jonathan was cruel, but because the closer they became, the harder it would be to leave at the end of the week. And the more painful it would be for Jonathan too. But neither man could stop what was happening. Bonds were forming in places where wounds had been carved years before. Healing was happening in ways none of them expected. The stranger Jonathan had nearly stepped over on the street was becoming something else entirely, a mirror, a reminder, a second chance. And that baby in his arms, she was beginning to teach him how to live again. The week was almost up, and fate was nowhere near finished with them. By the 7th day, the final day of the agreement, there was an unmistakable tension in the air. It wasn't spoken, but it hung over every interaction, every glance, every breath. Ethan felt it the moment he woke up. Jonathan felt it long before dawn, staring out the window of his bedroom as the morning light crept across the Beverly Hills skyline. Neither man wanted to confront the reality waiting for them. Yet both knew it couldn't be avoided forever. The original deal was clear: 7 days of shelter, then Ethan and Lily would move on. But the week had changed everything. Not just for Ethan, whose health had improved enough that he could sit up without dizziness and breathe without pain, but for Jonathan, who had slowly, unwillingly, almost unknowingly, begun to open a part of himself he had sworn would stay sealed forever. He tried to drown that realization in routine. He went to work early, sat in back-to-back meetings, reviewed contracts, and tried to focus on numbers and projections. But his attention drifted constantly to the baby in his guest house, to the man who had returned his wallet, to the laughter he had heard that morning through the window when he paused in the driveway before leaving. It distracted him more than he cared to admit. It bothered him how much it distracted him, because distraction meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was a luxury he had buried the day Emily died. Meanwhile, the guest house felt heavy with unspoken dread. Ethan fed Lily her morning bottle, feeling his hands tremble not from illness but from fear. He had grown used to this place, too used to it. The clean sheets, the warm air, the stocked fridge, the safety of knowing Lily wouldn't freeze at night. Most dangerous of all, he had grown used to Jonathan checking in. He had grown used to the small moments, Jonathan holding Lily with an expression he tried to mask, the quiet conversations that hinted at grief slowly thawing, the unexpected comfort in knowing that someone as powerful as Jonathan Reed actually cared whether he was recovering. But now the time was up. Dawn arrived mid-morning, carrying another basket of supplies. Her eyes softened the moment she saw Ethan. "You worried," she said gently. "Anyone can see that." Ethan didn't try to deny it. "It's the last day." He was clear about the deal. Donna shook her head. "Jonathan says a lot of things he doesn't truly mean. He protects himself with rules and deadlines. It's how he keeps from feeling too much." Ethan swallowed. "But he was serious, wasn't he? About us leaving?" Donna hesitated, then sighed. "He meant it when he said it. But people change, Ethan. Especially when a child is involved." She looked pointedly at Lily, who sat on the bed waving a plush rabbit Jonathan had bought. "And especially when that child reminds him of someone he loved more than anything." Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. The idea of leaving felt impossible. The idea of staying felt impossible too. He was trapped between gratitude and longing, between the past that had hurt him and a future that suddenly felt like it might hold something good. He didn't want to expect too much. Expectations could break a man faster than poverty. By afternoon, Ethan's anxiety deepened. Jonathan hadn't visited all day, not once. He told himself it was a busy workday. He told himself Jonathan had no obligation to check in. But the longer the hours stretched, the more certain Ethan felt that Jonathan was avoiding the inevitable conversation. That suspicion proved true. Jonathan sat in his office long after the sun had dipped low behind the buildings. He kept his hands steepled under his chin, staring at a contract he hadn't read a single word of. His assistant entered twice to remind him of his evening appointments, and twice he waved her away. He couldn't focus. He couldn't think. All he could see was Lily resting against his shoulder, giggling when he bounced her gently 2 mornings ago. All he could feel was Ethan's gratitude, the kind that pierced deeper than praise or money. And all he could fear was the hollow, echoing emptiness he knew would return the moment they walked out of his life. It scared him, more than he had expected, more than he was willing to admit. By early evening, he made a decision. He wasn't ready to talk, not yet, but he needed to see them. He needed to confirm something inside himself that he couldn't articulate. So instead of calling Ethan to the main house, he walked quietly toward the guest house, each step tightening the knot in his chest. Ethan noticed the silhouette approaching long before Jonathan reached the door. He stood quickly, smoothing his shirt, lifting Lily into his arms as if bracing himself for a verdict. When Jonathan entered, he didn't speak. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between strained and vulnerable. Lily broke the tension first. She squealed, arms outstretched toward him. Jonathan froze for half a second, just enough for Ethan to see the exact moment his resolve cracked before stepping forward and taking her into his arms. She giggled, pressing her cheek into his shoulder. Jonathan inhaled sharply, as if the simple act of holding her had reignited a part of him he had kept dormant for years. Ethan watched, heart aching. "She really likes you," he said softly. Jonathan's voice emerged lower than usual. Ivy noticed. They stood in quiet for a moment as Jonathan rocked Lily gently. The baby babbled, tugging at his tie, completely at ease with the man she trusted without question. Finally Ethan forced himself to speak. "It's the last day. I know what we agreed. I want to thank you for everything you've done. You saved us, literally." Jonathan stiffened, still holding Lily. He didn't look at Ethan. "Yes, the week is up." Ethan's stomach twisted, but he nodded. I understand. But Ethan didn't expect what Jonathan said next. You're not ready to leave. Ethan blinked. What? Jonathan finally looked at him, and for the first time, he didn't hide the emotion behind his words. You're recovering, but not fully. Your strength is nowhere near where it needs to be. And Lily, she's still adjusting. I won't send you back out there like this. Ethan stared, unsure he'd heard correctly. Are you saying we can stay? Jonathan exhaled shakily, running a hand over Lily's back. I'm saying the deal doesn't matter as much as I thought it did. It hit Ethan like sunlight breaking through winter clouds. Relief overwhelmed him. But before he could speak, Jonathan added, this isn't permanent. Not yet. We will take it 1 week at a time. He paused, voice quieter. I'm not ready to let her go. The her was Lily. But Ethan felt the weight of something deeper behind the words. Jonathan looked at the baby in his arms, then at Ethan. Stay, both of you, until you're truly well, until she's truly safe. For a long moment, Ethan could only nod, emotion too tight in his throat to speak. Lily giggled again, patting Jonathan's cheek with her small hand. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, absorbing it. Then he whispered, she reminds me that I'm still alive. And Ethan knew, without question, that none of their lives would ever be the same. The following days unfolded with a strange, fragile sense of normalcy, something Ethan had not felt in so long that he hardly recognized it. Even Jonathan, who clung to routine the way some men clung to faith, found his well-structured life shifting in ways he couldn't fully explain. The guesthouse lights were on earlier in the mornings now. The soft sounds of Lily laughing spilled through the open window when Donna arrived with breakfast. And occasionally, far more often than Jonathan admitted to himself, he found reasons to check on them. Just making sure everything is in order, he would mutter, though Donna always smirked knowingly behind him. The truth was far more complicated. Every day Jonathan told himself he was only extending the arrangement for practical reasons. Ethan needed more time to recover. Lily needed stability. And cutting them loose too soon would have been irresponsible. But the deeper truth, the one Jonathan avoided even in private, was that he no longer wanted them to leave. Returning home from work no longer felt like walking into a tomb carved out of memories. The house felt warmer now, though he rarely admitted that warmth came from the small structure behind it, not the mansion itself. Ethan, for his part, threw himself into recovery. He woke early, took his medication on time, ate consistently, and conserved his energy. By the fourth extension of the week-to-week agreement, he could carry Lily without losing his breath and walk small laps around the yard to rebuild strength. Each improvement filled him with hope and dread in equal measure. Hope because he could finally imagine a future again. Dread because each day he grew stronger brought him closer to the moment he would have to leave, and he wasn't sure he was ready. Worse still, he wasn't sure Jonathan was ready either. One crisp morning, after Dr. Harris examined him and declared his lungs on a promising path, Ethan stepped outside while Lily slept. The garden stretched before him in pristine rows of trimmed hedges and blooming roses. For months he lived with the constant instinct to stay alert, ready to fight or flee. Now, standing in the sun with nothing threatening him, he felt out of place. Peace was a foreign concept. He didn't quite trust it. Footsteps crunched softly behind him. Jonathan approached, hands in his pockets, gaze darting briefly to the guesthouse window where Lily slept. How's your breathing today? He asked. Ethan smiled lightly. Better. The doctor says I'm healing faster than expected. Jonathan nodded. Good. You've been taking the medication on schedule, every dose. Good, Jonathan repeated, though the tension in his voice didn't ease. They stood side by side, neither speaking for a moment. Birds chattered in the distance. The air smelled of roses and fresh soil. Jonathan broke the quiet first. You will be able to work again soon. Ethan's breath hitched, not from illness, but from the weight of what that meant. Yes, hopefully. I'm looking into jobs I might qualify for again. HVAC companies, maybe some maintenance work. He trailed off, unsure how to say the rest. That he was preparing to leave. That he didn't want to. That he didn't know how to say goodbye to the first safe place Lily had ever known. Jonathan's jaw tightened. You don't owe me an explanation, Mr. Miller. Ethan nodded slowly. Still, I want to be honest. I've been thinking about next steps, where Lily and I should go when I'm fully better. Jonathan didn't look at him. That's your decision. But the words didn't match the heavy pause that followed. Ethan hesitated. Do you want us to go? Jonathan's shoulders tensed, his spine stiffening as if preparing for impact. This arrangement was never meant to be permanent. You know that. I do, Ethan said quietly, but things have changed. Jonathan finally turned, his expression conflicted, hardened at the edges but soft in the center. I need clarity in my life, Ethan. Structure. Predictability. Ethan almost smiled. You've had none of that since we got here. Jonathan exhaled sharply. Exactly. And I don't know how to feel about it. Ethan stepped a little closer, careful not to cross boundaries. You've helped us. More than anyone ever has. But maybe this, he gestured around them, is helping you too. Jonathan bristled. I didn't do this for myself. I didn't say you did. Ethan met his gaze steadily. But Lily, she brings something good into your life. You can't deny that. Jonathan looked away, jaw clenching. She reminds me of Emily, he said, voice low, cracking slightly. And that terrifies me, because losing her destroyed me. I will not go through that again. Ethan's heart softened. I understand. I really do you? Jonathan asked bitterly. Do you understand what it's like to have your entire world taken from you while you stand there helpless? Ethan nodded. Yes, I lost Lily's mother. I know what it is to be powerless. Jonathan froze. For the first time, he looked at Ethan not with suspicion or caution but with shared grief. Recognition. Pain that mirrored his own. It was the first moment they truly saw each other. Jonathan inhaled deeply through his nose, steadying himself. You should know something, he said. When Emily died, I promised myself I would never let anyone get that close again. Not a child, not a family. No one. Ethan's voice softened. And yet here we are. Jonathan scrubbed a hand over his face. I didn't expect any of this. I didn't expect you, or her. I thought helping for a week would be simple. Quick, clean. But it wasn't. Ethan finished for him. No, Jonathan admitted. It wasn't. Before either could say more, Lily's cry drifted through the open window, soft but insistent. Jonathan's head snapped toward the sound instinctively, every protective impulse firing at once. Ethan saw it, recognized it, felt something in his chest loosen with gratitude and sorrow intertwined. I should go to her, Ethan said gently. But Jonathan raised a hand. Let me. Ethan blinked. Are you sure? Jonathan nodded once, already moving toward the guesthouse door with a determination that surprised them both. When he entered, Lily sat awake in her crib, small hands reaching up expectantly. She brightened the moment she saw him, a delighted squeal bursting from her tiny chest. Jonathan felt something inside him bend, soften, melt entirely. He lifted her into his arms, feeling her warmth against him. She relaxed into his shoulder as if she had been waiting for him specifically. Ethan watched from the doorway, a quiet ache in his eyes. Jonathan turned, holding Lily securely, and whispered, I don't know how to let go of her. Ethan swallowed hard. Maybe you don't have to. Jonathan held Lily a little closer. But I'm afraid of what comes next. I'm afraid of losing again. Then don't lose us, Ethan said softly. Not yet. Not because you re-afraid. The words hung in the air, fragile and true. Jonathan stared at Ethan, then at the baby in his arms. Something shifted. Not a decision yet, not fully, but the beginning of one. A possibility. A door cracking open inside a heart that had stayed sealed shut for far too long. And Ethan knew with absolute certainty that their story was nowhere near its end. The next 48 hours felt like stepping into the edge of a storm, calm on the surface, swirling with emotion underneath. Jonathan had not yet made a decision, not openly, not aloud. But the way he hovered near the guest house more frequently, the way he lingered in the doorway during Donna's visits, and the way he held Lily with increasing familiarity spoke louder than any declaration could. Ethan noticed every shift, every hesitation, every moment where Jonathan's eyes softened, and then immediately hardened again, as if he were trying to convince himself not to feel what he was feeling. But it was too late. Something irreversible had already begun. On the second morning, Ethan awoke to find Lily curled into the crook of his arm, sleeping peacefully after a night without coughing or fussing. She looked stronger, her cheeks rounder, her breathing steady. Ethan brushed a thumb over her tiny hand and felt pride swell in his chest. All he had ever wanted was a chance to give her this, give her a place where she didn't have to fight for survival. At least for now, he had succeeded. But the more stable she became, the more a different fear grew inside him. Stability meant mobility. Mobility meant leaving, and leaving meant tearing Lily away from the first sense of family she had known. Later that morning, as Ethan warmed a bottle on the kitchenette stove, a soft knock came at the door. Jonathan stepped inside without waiting for an answer, something he would never have dared 2 weeks ago. He wasn't wearing a suit today. Instead, he wore a simple black sweater and dark jeans, still expensive, still impeccably fitted, but noticeably more relaxed. Ethan tried to ignore the flicker of nervousness that sparked in his chest whenever Jonathan appeared unexpectedly. "Morning," Jonathan said, eyes drifting immediately to Lily, who was propped up on a folded blanket, babbling contentedly. Ethan nodded. "Morning. How did she sleep?" "Like a dream," Ethan replied. "I think she's finally settling in." Jonathan stepped closer, kneeling beside Lily. She squealed with joy and reached toward him. Her affection was natural and instinctive, unfiltered by boundaries or caution. Jonathan hesitated only a second before gently lifting her into his arms. Lily pressed her forehead against his chin, humming. Ethan felt the moment with a complicated mixture of warmth and dread. "She's getting attached," Ethan said quietly. Jonathan didn't look up. "Babies get attached easily." "Not like this," Ethan murmured. "Not to just anyone." Jonathan paused, his hand resting on Lily's back. "You think I don't know that?" His voice was soft but edged with something raw. Ethan swallowed. "What are you going to do when I'm well enough to leave?" Jonathan stood, turning toward the window as if the sunlight might offer an answer. Lily remained nestled against him, content and trusting. "I don't know," he said. "That's the truth." Ethan tightened his grip on the bottle in his hand. "I don't want to make things harder for you. I never meant to." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You didn't make anything harder. Life did." Ethan knew he was referring to Emily again. The ghost of his daughter hovered in every room Jonathan entered, every hesitant decision he made. And now Lily had stepped into that shadow, not replacing it, but illuminating it in ways Jonathan wasn't prepared for. A knock at the door broke the moment. It was Fernando. He didn't burst in this time. He waited, composed, almost gentle. "May I come in?" Jonathan nodded. Ethan motioned for him to enter. Fernando stepped inside, eyes scanning the scene, the baby in Jonathan's arms, Ethan watching nervously. The warmth filling the small space like sunlight. A slow, knowing sigh escaped him. "We need to talk," he said. Jonathan stiffened. "About what them?" Fernando replied, motioning at Ethan and Lily. "About you." Jonathan bristled. "I don't need an intervention." "This isn't an intervention," Fernando said calmly. "This is reality." He turned to Ethan. "Can I?" he asked, gesturing to a chair. Ethan nodded. Fernando sat, crossing one leg over the other, his expression serious but not unkind. "Jonathan," he began, "you are not the man you were 3 years ago. And that's understandable. Grief changes people. But you've been frozen since the day Emily died. You shut everything out: family, friends, joy, purpose. Nothing touched you anymore." Jonathan looked away sharply, holding Lily a little tighter. Fernando continued, "But these two," his eyes softened. "They've touched you. They've made you feel again. I see it every time you look at her." Jonathan's voice tightened. "Feeling doesn't change the risks." "No," Fernando agreed. "But avoiding feeling doesn't change the pain." He leaned forward. "What are you truly afraid of, John? Losing them? Or losing yourself again?" Jonathan didn't answer. He just stared at Lily, whose hand now rested on his sweater, gripping the fabric as though claiming him. Ethan watched from the side, unsure if he had the right to speak, but unable to stay silent. "I don't want to hurt you," Ethan said softly. "And I don't want to uproot Lily if she's already bonded with you. But I also don't want to assume anything. I don't want to cross lines that aren't mine to cross." Jonathan finally looked at him. "I don't know what lines exist anymore." Fernando nodded slowly. "Then create new ones." The idea hung in the room like a fragile promise. Jonathan paced a few steps, one hand on his hip, the other cradling Lily instinctively. "If you stay longer," he said carefully to Ethan, "things will get more complicated." "They already are," Ethan replied. "But I'm not running from that if you not." Jonathan stopped pacing, his eyes tired, conflicted, hopeful met Ethan's. "I don't want her to leave," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want you to leave either. Not yet." The words hit Ethan with the force of something he had wanted desperately but feared deeply. "Then let us stay," he said. "Not forever. Not with any assumptions. Just let us stay until all three of us know what comes next." Fernando exhaled in relief. "Jonathan," he said, "that is the first honest thing you've said in years." Jonathan ignored him. He looked at Lily, then at Ethan. "This isn't just about you two helping me feel something again," he said. "This is about doing what's right for her, for you, for all of us." Ethan nodded. "I agree." Jonathan hesitated. then finally said the words that shifted the entire future of their lives. Stay. As long as you need. We'll figure out the rest together. Ethan's knees went weak. Lily squealed with joy as if she understood everything. Fernando smiled. Well, he said, rising, looks like we just witnessed the beginning of something big. Jonathan looked at Lily, then Ethan, then the small guest house that suddenly felt like a home, and for the first time in years, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, life was giving him a second chance. And this time, he wasn't going to let it slip away. The decision for Ethan and Lily to stay spoken quietly in that small guest house, under the weight of 3 very different lives, changed the entire dynamic of their world overnight. It was not a formal arrangement, not a contract, not something Jonathan etched into stone the way he handled every other commitment in his life. It was a promise born of instinct, healing, fear, and something Jonathan had almost forgotten existed: hope. But hope carried its own complications. Over the next several days, the boundaries between their lives blurred even more. Jonathan found himself returning to the guest house early in the mornings, sometimes before the sun rose. He would claim he wanted to check on Lily's progress or review Ethan's recovery. But Donna saw through him easily. She teased him more than once, earning a scowl that held no real irritation. For Ethan, the days became a strange mix of gratitude and anxiety. He no longer woke each morning with the dread of starvation, the fear of losing Lily, or the pain of untreated illness. He was healing, and Lily was thriving more beautifully each day. But beneath that peace was a new worry, now that they were emotionally intertwined with Jonathan. What would happen if something changed? What if Jonathan panicked and pushed them away? What if this fragile trust broke under the weight of the past? Still, the house, especially the guest house, settled into a rhythm. It was imperfect, it was new, but it was theirs. One quiet afternoon, Ethan sat on the small sofa with Lily in his lap, guiding her chubby hands across a set of colorful blocks Donna had brought earlier. She babbled happily, stacking the blocks only to knock them down with gleeful triumph. Ethan laughed softly, his eyes bright with love. Just then, Jonathan stepped into the doorway, holding a stack of neatly printed documents. He looked tired from work, a faint shadow under his eyes. But the moment Lily saw him, she squealed and reached outward as though greeting the sun itself. Jonathan's entire posture softened as he approached. There she is, he murmured, taking her from Ethan's arms without hesitation. Lily settled against him, holding onto the collar of his shirt like she belonged there. Ethan watched the scene with a mix of wonder and heartbreak. Jonathan carried her so naturally now, like someone who had done it 1,000 times. "You were back early," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Meeting ended sooner than expected," Jonathan replied. "And I needed to take care of something here." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Something?" Jonathan hesitated before handing him the documents. Ethan unfolded the papers and glanced through them, confusion knitting his brow. "What is all this?" "Identification forms," Jonathan explained, "replacement documents, a new birth certificate for Lily, social records, job application support, and a preliminary housing assistance application in case you want something stable long-term." Ethan froze, staring at the stack in disbelief. No one had ever done anything like this for him. These papers represented identity, legitimacy, a future. "I don't know what to say," Ethan murmured. "You don't have to say anything," Jonathan said. "I'm helping because it's the right thing to do." Ethan's hands tightened around the papers. "This isn't just help. This is giving us back a life." Jonathan exhaled slowly. "Maybe. But I also know that for any future decision, for staying, for leaving, for whatever comes next, you need to have choices. Real choices. Not desperation." Ethan's eyes warmed with gratitude. "I don't want to leave," he said softly. "But I know it's complicated." Jonathan froze. Lily nestled against him. His voice was barely audible. "Yes, it is." A knock interrupted the moment. Fernando once again. Only this time he entered with far more grace and far less intrusion. He smiled at Lily, pinched her tiny foot, then glanced between the two men. "Good," he said. "You're all here. We need to talk." Jonathan's posture stiffened instantly. "What now?" "Relax," Fernando said, raising both hands. "This isn't a lecture." He looked at Ethan. "It's an update." Ethan frowned. "But what?" Fernando pulled a folder from his briefcase. "First, I've spoken with a few contacts. Some high-vac companies have openings. They're willing to review your application as soon as you're medically cleared." Ethan's heartbeat quickened. "Really?" "Yes," Fernando said. And second, I found a transitional housing program that doesn't separate fathers from infants. If you ever choose to move there, they'll support you both until you're fully stable. Ethan nodded gratefully, but Jonathan's jaw tightened. Why are you bringing this up? Fernando sighed. Because you need options. Both of you. And, Jonathan, you need to stop pretending you can keep them here forever without addressing what it means. Jonathan looked away sharply. Lily tugged at his sweater as if grounding him. I don't know what it means, Jonathan admitted, voice cracking slightly. I just know I don't want them gone. Fernando stepped closer, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. Then confront that. Don't run from it. He turned to Ethan. And you stop assuming you'll be a burden by staying. You not. The room fell quiet, not empty, just full of everything none of them knew how to say. Jonathan looked at Lily again. She looked up at him wide-eyed, trusting him completely. He exhaled slowly, as though releasing a weight he'd carried for years. She makes this complicated, he said. Ethan shook his head. She makes it simple. Jonathan met his eyes. How? Because she doesn't care about your money or your past, or your mistakes, Ethan said. She cares that you hold her, that you come back, that you see her. Jonathan's throat tightened. And you? Ethan swallowed. I care that you retrying. And I care that you not pushing us away anymore. Jonathan didn't respond right away. But something changed in his expression. A softness no longer hidden. A decision forming slowly, painfully, but undeniably. He handed Lily back to Ethan, though reluctantly. I need time to think, he said. But not the kind of thinking I used to do. Not the kind where I bury everything. Ethan nodded. Take all the time you need. Jonathan turned toward the door but paused before exiting. Ethan, he said without looking back, would you consider something? Ethan's heartbeat quickened. What is it? Jonathan hesitated. Would you ever consider staying here long term? Not as guests. Not out of desperation, but as his voice faltered, unsure how to label something that had no name yet. A family. A partnership. A second chance. Jonathan didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Ethan felt the weight of the question settle into his bones. It wasn't a commitment. Not yet. But it was the first step toward a future he never dared imagine. Yes, Ethan said softly. I would consider it. More than consider it. Jonathan nodded, once relief, fear, hope, and something else flickering across his face before stepping out into the fading afternoon light. Ethan held Lily close, his heart pounding with something warm and terrifying and new. The story wasn't finished. It was just beginning. And for the first time, the future didn't look like uncertainty. It looked like possibility. The days following Jonathan's unfinished question unfolded with an electricity that none of them could ignore. It wasn't tension exactly, nor was it certainty. It was something suspended between those extremes, like standing on the edge of a bridge, looking down not with fear, but with the dizzying awareness that stepping forward could change everything forever. Ethan felt it every time Jonathan visited the guest house, every time their hands brushed while passing Lily back and forth, every time their conversations drifted toward vulnerability they once avoided. Jonathan felt it too. His usual crisp composure had softened, not noticeably to outsiders, but to Ethan, the change was unmistakable. Jonathan lingered longer, spoke more quietly, asked more questions, not the professional, predictable type, but personal ones. Where did you grow up? What did you dream of becoming? What would you want for Lily's future? Each question was a thread weaving their lives closer. Each answer was a stitch undoing Jonathan's old defenses. But with closeness came fear. One evening, while Ethan fed Lily, Jonathan returned from work carrying takeout boxes, something he hadn't done for anyone since Emily died. He set the food on the table, removed his jacket, and sat beside Ethan on the sofa. Lily lay between them on a soft blanket, kicking her legs and babbling happily. They ate quietly at first, the simple comfort of shared space making words unnecessary. Then Jonathan cleared his throat. I've been thinking, he said, staring at Lily rather than Ethan. About what happens next. Ethan set down his fork carefully. His heart thumped hard in his chest, and Jonathan hesitated. And I want to do this right, whatever this is. Ethan felt warmth spread through him. I do too. Jonathan exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. But I also need to be sure I'm not making decisions out of grief, or out of trying to replace what I lost. Ethan nodded gently. Lily isn't a replacement for Emily. I know, Jonathan said quickly. I do, but she reminds me of a part of myself I buried with her. He paused. And you remind me of the type of man I want to be again. The admission struck Ethan like a physical force. He swallowed hard. I'm just trying to do right by my daughter. And you are, Jonathan said. You've done more for her with nothing than some people do with everything. Ethan looked away, emotions thick in his throat. Then, softly he said, You've done a lot for us too. Lily chose that moment to squeal and roll onto her side, reaching for Jonathan's hand. He offered it instinctively, letting her tiny fingers wrap around his thumb. The gesture grounded him. I want her in my life, Jonathan murmured. I want both of you in my life. I just don't know what that looks like yet. Ethan smiled faintly. Then we figure it out together. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the guest house windows when Jonathan arrived again, this time looking uncharacteristically nervous. He held a small envelope in his hand. Ethan, still groggy, sat up as Jonathan stood in the doorway. What's that? Ethan asked. Jonathan stepped forward slowly and placed the envelope on the table. Something I should have given you on the first week, he said. But I wasn't ready then. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a check large enough to cover months of rent anywhere in Los Angeles. His eyes widened. Jonathan, before you say anything, Jonathan interrupted. It's not charity, not payment, not debt. It's a safety net. Ethan frowned. For what? For choice, Jonathan said. So you don't have to stay because you feel trapped, or leave because you feel unworthy. You stay only if you want to. And you go only if you choose to. Ethan stared at him, stunned. It was more than generosity, it was trust. Respect, something deeper he wasn't sure how to name. I can't accept this, Ethan said softly. Yes, Jonathan replied firmly, you can, because you deserve a real chance. Both of you do. Lily babbled loudly, as if chiming in with approval. Jonathan smiled despite the tension in the room. He picked her up, holding her against his chest with a comfort that felt almost fatherly. Ethan watched the two of them together, Jonathan humming, Lily giggling, and something inside him fluttered between gratitude and fear. Jonathan, he said quietly, you know if we stay it won't be simple. Jonathan nodded. Nothing meaningful is simple. People might judge, Ethan said. They already are. Your business could take a hit. Then I'll build it back. Ethan swallowed. And you could lose us someday. Jonathan's voice soft and thickened. I could. But I already lost everything once by trying not to feel. I'm not doing that again. Ethan's chest tightened. His eyes stung. It was the closest thing to a confession either of them had spoken. Later that afternoon, Fernando arrived unexpectedly. He walked into the guest house with a document folder and a look of both amusement and concern. All right, he said, tossing the folder onto the couch, since you two are clearly navigating uncharted territory. Let's at least be practical about this. Jonathan glared at him. Fernando, relax. Fernando interrupted. I'm not here to ruin your emotional progress. I'm here to help you structure it. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Structure it. Fernando nodded. If you're rethinking about staying here long term, which, let's be honest, is obvious to everyone but the two of you, then we need to consider logistics. He opened the folder. Legal guardianship options, financial planning, health insurance for Lily. Potential employment contracts for Ethan. Jonathan covered his face with his hand. You removing too fast. You removing too slow, Fernando countered. Ethan laughed, nervous, surprised, touched. We not anything yet, he said. We still figuring things out. Fernando shrugged. Then consider this a blueprint for whatever comes next. Ethan glanced at Jonathan. Jonathan looked at Lily. Lily blew a bubble. And suddenly, the heaviness in the room dissolved into quiet amusement. When Fernando left, Jonathan stayed behind, lingering as Ethan placed Lily into her crib for an afternoon nap. The moment the baby's eyes closed, Jonathan turned to Ethan. He's not wrong, he said softly. Ethan nodded. I know. Jonathan took a step closer. I don't know what this becomes. I don't know what we become. But I want the chance to find out. Ethan's breath caught. Me too. They stood inches apart, no labels, no promises, just possibility. Jonathan reached out, not to hold him, not to claim anything, just to rest a hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder. A touch that said, you're not alone, not anymore. And Ethan let him, because it was true. In the quiet that followed, Lily shifted in her crib, sighing softly. They both turned toward her, instinctively moving in sync, the way people do when they share something deeper than circumstance. Jonathan whispered, whatever happens next, we'll face it together. And for the first time, Ethan believed that a future one filled with stability, healing, and maybe even love was truly possible. Not guaranteed, not simple, but possible. And that was enough to change everything. At its core, This story carries a lesson about the unexpected ways healing enters our lives and how compassion can rebuild what grief has broken. Jonathan, a man who once believed pain had carved out the softest parts of him, spent years constructing walls so high that even hope couldn't climb them. He convinced himself that distance meant safety, that emotional isolation would protect him from ever losing again. Yet life has a way of sending us reminders, gentle, persistent, sometimes disguised in the most unassuming forms that we are meant to feel, to connect, to be changed by the people who cross our paths. Ethan and Lily were not part of Jonathan's carefully controlled world. They were everything he avoided: vulnerability, unpredictability, and emotional risk. But through them, Jonathan learned what many of us forget as we grow older, that the heart, no matter how wounded, is not meant to stay closed forever. This story teaches that compassion is not a transaction, it is a bridge. When Ethan returned the wallet instead of keeping the money, Jonathan assumed the gesture lacked depth, that it was merely coincidence or a simple moral choice. But in reality, it was a moment where their worlds, though vastly different in wealth and circumstance, aligned through integrity. Ethan wasn't looking for a reward. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He acted out of principle, driven by love for his daughter and an unwavering belief that doing right matters even when no one is watching. That moment, seemingly small, became the catalyst for everything that followed. It reminds us that every choice, even the quiet ones, can spark a chain of impact we never foresee. Kindness doesn't always echo loudly, but its ripples reach far beyond the moment they reborn. Another profound lesson woven throughout the story is that healing often comes in unexpected forms, and sometimes, the people we help end up helping us even more. Ethan sought safety, warmth, and a chance to survive long enough to provide for Lily. He saw Jonathan as a man with resources, someone who could offer temporary refuge. What he didn't realize was that Jonathan needed something just as desperately: a reason to feel alive again. Lily's presence, her laughter, her trust, her small hand gripping his thumb awakened something long dormant in Jonathan. She reminded him of joy, innocence, and the beauty that still existed beyond grief. Through caring for her, even in small ways, he relearned the tenderness he thought had died with his daughter. The message is clear: we often enter someone's life thinking we are the ones needing help, only to discover we were brought into their life to help them heal too. The story also underscores that family is not defined by blood alone, but by choice, by action, and by the willingness to show up when it matters most. Jonathan had every reason, legal, emotional, practical, to remain distant. He could have adhered strictly to the one-week arrangement. He could have convinced himself that helping more would only lead to heartbreak. But the heart rarely consults the mind when something meaningful begins forming. Little by little, Jonathan stepped past the boundaries he built. He showed up. He cared. He allowed himself to feel affection again, to protect again, to hope again. And in doing so, he became something to Ethan and Lily that neither of them expected: a source of stability, comfort, and possibility. Family is not always inherited. Sometimes it is discovered in the most unlikely moments, between people who choose each other despite fear, despite past wounds, despite the uncertainty of what the future holds. A deeper message running through the narrative is that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like vulnerability. Ethan's courage was raw and visible, fighting illness, surviving the streets, raising a newborn alone with no safety net. But Jonathan's courage was quieter. It was the courage to try again, to feel again, to open the door when everything in him screamed to keep it shut, to risk love in a world where love once led to unbearable loss. For many people, vulnerability is the ultimate fear. We fear being hurt, judged, abandoned. But this story shows that vulnerability is also the gateway to transformation. Without it, Jonathan would have remained a shell of the man he was meant to be. Without it, Ethan and Lily would have never found a safe place to rebuild. Opening yourself to others is frightening, but it is also the doorway to connection, healing, and unexpected joy. Ultimately, the lesson of the story is that second chances rarely arrive in perfect moments or perfect forms. They arrive messy, complicated, wrapped in uncertainty. They require us to stretch, to trust, to challenge the narratives we tell ourselves about who we are and what we deserve. Jonathan believed his life was destined to remain cold and controlled. Ethan believed he might never climb out of survival mode. Yet together, they created a space where each of them could breathe again. Their compassion for each other reshaped their lives more powerfully than either could have achieved alone. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: love, whether romantic, parental, or simply human, does not always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it grows slowly, quietly in the day-to-day moments where someone chooses to return, chooses to stay, chooses to care. It grows in the trust of a child reaching out her small hand, in the willingness of a grieving man to hold that hand, in the humility of a father accepting help he never expected, and in the courage of two men allowing their lives to intertwine despite the fear of what that might mean. This story teaches us that healing is possible, that goodness still exists, that kindness can transform even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the family we build along the way becomes the foundation for a future brighter than anything we once dared to imagine. If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your feedback. Thank you for watching until the end.